We got a lot changing in college football now. We got the college football playoff about to look a little bit different. We got conferences, I believe, about to change even more when it comes to the realignment. One thing that's not changing, though, is this show, The Hard Count, is, of course, the People's College Football Show. Bringing ball to you every single day here on the On3 YouTube channel. Appreciate you being dialed in. Appreciate you being subscribed. Got a lot to jump into. I just mentioned we're about to talk about the playoff changes that are seemingly on the way, per Yahoo's Ross Dellinger. Before we get to that, though, we got a lot of dogs that watch this show, man. A lot of y'all that are just in the trenches, whether you're watching at work, whether you're watching at school, or whether you're watching on the road, whatever it is. My guy, Evan, is watching today after his first day of chemo. My guy's at Tennessee. Took a quick little break from that last semester of college, and he's going to go beat the heck out of brain cancer. So, Evan, we appreciate you being dialed in, brother, and glad to have you making this show what it is, man. We're all with you, all behind you. Send the thoughts and prayers your way. Playoff is about to look a little bit different here, per Ross Dellinger of Yahoo Sports, letting the people know on, I guess it was Sunday night, that the Big Ten and the SEC are going to throw their weight around, have been throwing their weight around for a while now, and they're going to have, it seems like here, per the report, each have 4 guaranteed spots in the college football playoff. So we did a reaction video to this on Monday morning, another reason to be subscribed. But I want us to unpack, 1, like what's going on here, 2, why this is happening, 3, what it means, and 4, what could be next. Because you and I both know, man, this whole conference realignment thing with the playoff switching up and things of that nature, it's like musical chairs. And musical chairs, from what I can gather, is the game in college football right now where the music is starting to slow down a little bit. You better find a chair, and if you can find a chair in the Big Ten and the SEC, more power to you. So again, 4 spots automatically going to be given, it looks like here, for the Big Ten and the SEC as we reach the next iteration of what the college football playoff could look like. Now, this is likely going to be a 14-team or 16-team college football playoff. So my first thought here is, well, what happens to the committee? Because in a 14-team playoff, we're still keeping those conference champions as bids, auto bids into the college football playoff. So you have 8 from the SEC and Big Ten combined, and then you have a Big 12 champ, You have an ACC champ. You have the highest-ranked G5 champ. That makes 11. So what, a committee's going to decide on 3 teams? We got a 16 committee decides on 5 teams? Oh, by the way, Notre Dame, they're protected in this whole thing. If they're in the top 14 of a 14-team playoff, they'll have a spot in the college football playoff. So you see how this thing is slowly but surely starting to look a lot more NFL-ish. Why is this happening? If I'm a Big 12 fan today, and I'm just now finding out about this, 1, I apologize, and I feel for you, and I probably resonate a little bit more than you even think I resonate with you when it comes to how this impacts your conference. But I'm sitting here saying, so the Big Ten and the SEC just get to walk in here and take 4 spots each? 8 spots total? How does that work? JD, walk me through the math on that one. And the math, quite frankly, from what I can gather, is a lot more geared towards revenue and viewership and all those things. The best way to put this, and I said this in our reaction video, I'll say it again, the SEC and the Big Ten are hosting a party. They are that rich friend that has the mansion, they have the setup, they have whatever they need to host the party. They draw a lot of eyeballs, they draw a lot of guests. So if you want to be at their party, be a part of their party, you have got to play by their rules. The report also says, per Ross Dellinger, at the front of the article, he says, listen, man, the SEC and the Big Ten, they told him straight up, if you don't want to play by our rules, then you're not invited to our party. In fact, we'll go have our own party, our own playoff somewhere else. Again, they are the ones that are holding all the cards here, so that's the reason why they'd be able to make a move like that. And, of course, not just speaking to the Big 12 here, also speaking to the ACC. I'll give you my take on this in a little bit. Spoiler alert, not a huge fan of it. Not just the fact that we're expanding the playoff, but not a big fan of automatic bids for a conference in general. I digress. So what's going to happen in the immediate effect? 1, the SEC is likely going to go to 9 conference games. If you remember correctly, that was a big talking point throughout this whole discussion as we moved into the 12-team playoff. Is, well, they're only playing 8 conference games. We're all playing 9. How does that work? Well, the SEC thinks pretty highly of themselves, and it's understandable to see why that is, given their track record of national titles and NFL draft or NFL draftees. I digress. They're saying we're not going to go and schedule another game against one of our conference opponents if we think that could hurt our chances of making the college football playoff. Because y'all want to talk about records so much, that's fine, talk about the records, but if you're not giving us any extra credit for playing Georgia and A&M in the last couple of weeks, then we're going to make sure we play less conference games, protect ourselves, be ready for the postseason, or help ourselves get more people into the postseason. People, of course, being teams here. The reason why that's not going to be the case anymore is because if you're the SEC or the Big Ten, SEC in regards to the 9 conference games, you now have a little bit of a safety net. Like, you don't have to worry quite as much playing an extra conference game because okay, if I'm just in the top 4 of my conference, I'm going to have a seat at the table. Conference title weekend, however, will look different for both of these conferences. I don't know how it's going to impact the other conferences, to be honest with you, but have to believe there'll be some kind of ripple effect. What Ross Dellinger is suggesting or is talking about in his article is that conference title weekend will turn more so into a conference college football playoff weekend. And it's easy to see why. Like, if I have the top 2 teams in my conference, I don't want them to play an extra game, get more tread on the tires, and potentially hurt their chances when they get to the college football playoff. How different, and again, this is an open-ended question. I don't know if it changes anything, but Georgia, at the very least, probably feels better about their chances if they don't play in the SEC title game and Carson Beck is healthy for their playoff run. Still happy to win the SEC. I digress. But the thought here is you can have 3 versus 6 in your conference and 4 versus 5 play each other to get those final 2 spots in both the Big Ten and the SEC as it pertains to the college football playoff. So conference title looking different for the SEC and the Big Ten. The champions you would imagine are probably decided during the regular season. The SEC going to 9 conference games. And in addition to all of this now, if you're a fan of just seeing big brands play each other, then you're probably a favor of this. The SEC and the Big Ten, it sounds like, are going to have a scheduling agreement. Why? Because it's going to make a lot of money. Like Michigan, Texas made everybody a lot of money. Ohio State playing Alabama, that'll make you some money. Georgia and Penn State will make you some money. I mean, you go down the list here and you can just talk about whatever. LSU and Oregon will make you some money. Again, safety net, everyone gets more money. That's kind of the way this whole thing is trending. And the thing that I think is most interesting about this, I don't know that anybody's that surprised that the SEC and the Big Ten are holding a lot of cards here. Where this gets interesting to me is what happens to the other schools in this whole situation, or the other conferences rather, that aren't in the SEC and the Big Ten. Like, if I'm a Clemson and a Florida State, I've been trying to get out of the ACC for the better part of the last, year plus? I would have to believe now those lawyers that are working for the Clemsons and the Florida States of the world to get them out of the ACC, if they weren't working overnight before, they're probably doing that right now. That's where I think this whole discussion leads next, is what are the next dominoes to fall? We didn't cover this on this previous reaction video. I want to do so right now. To me, the next domino to fall is the ACC is going to have, I believe, a very Pac-12 come apart at the seams kind of, let's call it what it is, a downfall. And I'm not here for it. I appreciate and love the ACC. It's a big part of my college football fandom and the fabric that is. But if Florida State and Clemson when and if they find their way out of the conference, which, again, more urgency now with this whole college football playoff automatic qualifier situation, that's only going to create the Jenga effect. Because when those two leave, what do you think Miami's doing? What do you think the SMUs of the world are doing? And it may be a slow deterioration. I think it'll be a lot more all at once-ish. I think it'll be a lot like when you saw USC and UCLA leave, then you saw Oregon and Washington leave from the Pac-12, and that whole thing crumbled, unfortunately, pretty quickly. That's a guy who grew up on Pac-10 football, but it is what it is. My question then becomes, what happens to the Big 12? Because I think what will happen is the ACC probably gets cleaned out for the most part first. I think what will happen is we'll get a few years down the line, and then the Big 12, from a survival perspective, schools within that conference will say, okay, well, this thing is clearly headed towards an AFC, NFC model. We got to find a way to get on board one of those ships. Whoever wants us, we got to jump and got to make it happen. This is not me down on the Big 12. This is, I think, the way this thing is going to shake out. Who would that be to make the first jump? UCF makes a lot of sense with just how large their alumni base is and the attraction that would be. TCU, that whole Dallas-Fort Worth tie could be appealing to, I would have to believe, one of these conferences if it gets down to it. Also, maybe the package deal of like an Arizona and Arizona State could be a good deal. And again, I understand why this is all happening. I totally do. I understand that this is money calling the shots. I understand that the SEC and the Big Ten, like we've said now many times, hold a lot of the cards. But unfortunately, I don't think this is best for the sport. And we have nobody to blame here but ourselves. Now, I guess you could say, JD, we blame greed and we blame the people wearing suits making these decisions. Of course, I hear that. But remember now, a lot of us, say us, I don't include ourselves here, fortunately and unfortunately on this show, we're calling for an expanded playoff. Why? Inclusion. Want to let the little guy have a chance now. And that was all given to us. I keep saying this. I think it was kind of some smoke and mirrors. Because if we thought we were going to live in a world where the SEC and the Big Ten were going to get the same number of teams guaranteed in as a G5 or as an ACC or a Big 12, I think we were kidding ourselves. And given the amount of power that is going unchecked in college football right now between the SEC and the Big Ten and the rest of the sport, it's hard to blame anybody. Because if I'm in charge of the Big Ten, yes, I'm going to act in interest of my schools. I'm not going to worry about the health of college football. I'm trying to help my schools all make more money and have success and make the playoff and all that, and therefore so on and so be it. But what I will say, just to go our final take on this, I would have been in favor of, if we had to go to more teams, just doing away with auto bids. We said it yesterday. I keep referring back to the last video because it's a very similar thing that we're saying. I just wanted to make sure we said it together in a full show capacity. Auto bids to me are kind of funny because they reward a conference. Not that you shouldn't be rewarded for winning your conference or for having success within your conference, but I don't think every conference is equal any given year. Like I would say the last year of the Pac-12, you could make a case for the Pac-12 being the best conference in college football. Let's reward teams. Let's reward teams during specific seasons and not conferences every single year. To me, that doesn't make a ton of sense. So it's unfortunate. I keep saying nostalgia is one of the pillars of college football, and I would have loved to see that hold a little bit more steady for a longer period of time. There's going to be a day and age where my little girl grows up and she says, Dad, what was the Pac-10 like? And it'll probably draw a tear or two from my eye, and it's going to be something that I just have to find a way to work my way through. I'll tell her about it. It's not going to be without some emotion baked in there. So that's where we're headed. That's what's happening here. These are all, again, reports. You hear words like momentum and building. This is happening. Okay, this is going to happen. It's a matter of when, not if, and the specifics, whether it's 16 teams or 14 teams. But the Big Ten, the SEC, they will each have 4 teams, and the rest of college football is going to have to figure out what to do next. And my guess is the Super Conference era is a lot closer than we all thought. So here we go. So that's the world we're living in, man. Appreciate y'all being tuned in, man. Again, make sure you have subscribed. If you're listening via podcast, shouts to y'all. Love y'all. Also, a little Easter egg here. If you're subscribed to the podcast feed, whether it's Apple or Spotify, no judgment on whatever platform you use, just if you're subscribed to the podcast feed, keep an eye out for some extra content coming your way. There's some things that we don't do on this YouTube show that will show up in the podcast feed. I'll leave it at that, but stay tuned. Would encourage you to be subscribed there. So got to thinking now, with the season behind us, who's set up for success, not just for next year, but for the next 3 years? It's also probably a conversation we should have as the college football playoff automatic qualifiers is essentially all but guaranteed to look different here when we get to 2026 and beyond. I want us to talk about this together. Who are the top 10 teams set up for success in college football over the next 3 years? Make sure you are subscribed. Appreciate you on YouTube when you are dialed in being subscribed to that degree. My criteria for this list, 10 up to 1, head coach / head coach stability. If your head coach is flirting with the NFL, yeah, it's probably going to hurt my my confidence level in putting you as a team that's going to have a ton of success over the course of the next 3 years. Not that I don't think you can still have success with a new head coach, but yeah, I do have to account for that variable. I think we all do. How are your resources? It's no secret. If you want to win at the highest level in college football, you better be willing to pay at the highest level in college football. Track record to me is important. Not everything, but I do think we can get a good gauge for the future by taking a pulse of the history. I digress. Also, how you're recruiting. Obviously, talent is the lifeblood of the sport, especially at the high school level. I don't care what Twitter, ML, Football, Dov Kleiman are trying to tell you. It still matters, all right? NFL Rookie Watch 2, you're not exempt from this. So, 10 up to 1. At number 10, I got Texas A&M. To me, this is a resources bet. We know what they're about in College Station. We know they love their Aggies. We know they will give big money to support their Aggies. This is a Mike Elko bet. I said it before. I believe so much in what he brings to the table. I think he is everything that A&M has been missing. Structure, toughness, culture, all those things. Not to say you didn't have it. You didn't have it at this level. done more with less his entire career. He gets A&M. A lot of people will push back on this and say, here we go again, drinking the Kool-Aid. Do you believe this guy? This guy's he's falling for it again. Again, I have not fallen for the A&M hype train just yet. I'm doing it this year. If we get hurt, so be it. We'll talk about it. But A&M as a place is not snake bitten. There's nothing wrong with the logo. There's nothing wrong with Kyle Field. There's no voodoo. It's just the way that it's gone the last couple of seasons. Mike Elko has not been the head coach for that. Marcel Reed has not been the quarterback for that. Also, doesn't hurt that you may have him for not just this year, but also next year if you want to talk about the next 3 years. So A&M for me at 10, feel pretty good about that. Also, they recruited at a high level. I don't think that'll change anytime soon. And number 9, I got Tennessee. I trust Josh Heupel, man. And you look at what Tennessee is under him. One, they've won a lot. Okay, 2 double-digit win seasons over the course of the last 3 years. That's first off. Second off, he just had his best recruiting class of his entire time in Knoxville. So you're watching the trend. It just kind of keeps going up and to the right. Not a bad vibe. They're always going to, I believe, as long as Josh Heupel's the head coach, be able to recruit a quarterback. George McIntyre in this most recent class. Jake Merklinger in the class before. Nico Iamaleava. Like, you see where I'm going with this. They have one of the most difficult positions to account for. You feel pretty good about Josh Heupel going and adding a player at that position. Now, the evolution of Tennessee that we're starting to see is the way they are adapting in the trenches. We've said this many times, but if you're new, welcome. We'll say it again. Tennessee used to have to scheme around the trenches. We don't have the big boys up front. Therefore, we have to beat you with scheme and beat you with guys on the outside and matchups and quarterback play, all that. That's great. It's well and good. It's a nice short-term play. Josh Heupel understood for us, the next phase is getting those big boys. Y'all, they got them. Of their most recent recruiting class, their top 2 prospects were on the offensive and defensive line. Not a coincidence. It's the way Tennessee's trending. I believe in the direction. I like Josh Heupel in Tennessee a lot, and to me, they're in the top 10 when you look at the next 3 years. Now, at number 8, I got LSU. And when I put LSU down in this list, the song I'll Stand By You just sort of kept playing in my head. Because we've said this for a long time around Brian Kelly. I think he's as steady as they come. I think you can talk about what he didn't do at Notre Dame and have a conversation about what Marcus Freeman's doing now, but also understand that Brian Kelly at LSU has a lot more firepower behind him at LSU, a big reason why he took the job. If Les Miles can win a national title at LSU, I get it's a different era. I have a hard time believing that Brian Kelly can't get it done. Is it the next 3 years? I don't know. But you look at how they recruit. You look at the way that they are going to, I believe, have resource power. They showed that off this past portal cycle. LSU, I'm not so sure that they're not going to have a similar awakening to what Michigan had this past portal cycle and what they did on the recruiting trail. And I know that's kind of a tough comp to make because of the whole Bryce Underwood thing, which is, again, I apologize for the friction there. But I'm not so sure that LSU won't just kind of get pissed off for greatness. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not so sure if LSU and the people involved in Baton Rouge and the pride and the logo and all those things that matter so much to them, I don't know if there's not a point where they just say, you know what? We're going to pour a ridiculous amount of money into this thing. We're going to have however many $1 million worth of a roster because that's how much we care. And so if that's the case, I think LSU is very much so in the mix. And the Brian Kelly jokes will fly. Let them fly. We will laugh when it's all said and done. At number 7, I got Alabama. I wasn't sure where to put Bama because you're trying to make a 3-year projection based on a 1-year sample size of a new head coach in Kalen DeBoer. This is a bet for me. I am betting that Kalen DeBoer's best football is still ahead of him in Tuscaloosa, and I'm also betting that what he does on the recruiting trail will be sustainable. Nobody questioned if Kalen DeBoer can coach ball, man. I mean, the dude's 113 and 16 as a head coach. That's okay. I think that works out just fine. Yeah, you're wearing Nick Saban-sized shoes right now to try and walk in what he did in Tuscaloosa, but the question was, can he recruit? And he is recruiting. A top 3 class this past cycle. You got to get the NIL thing figured out, but I like where Bama's heading the next couple of years. I'm not selling stock. I'll go ahead and bet DeBoer and feel good about doing it. At number 6, our team that will have our team that is set up for success over the course of the next 3 years. Y'all, I'm taking Michigan. And I get last year wasn't the perfect storm for Sharon Moore's first season, but you still beat Ohio State, the national champion, at their place, planted a flag, good vibes. You still beat Alabama, a team that was knocking on the door of the college football playoff. NIL is something that is going to be a weapon for them in the future. Like Steve Wiltfong said it best on our National Signing Day show. They are going to have a loaded gun when it comes to NIL. That's wild. That is extremely wild. And also you add on to that the idea that you have a quarterback in Bryce Underwood for the next 3 years, which is this timeline that we're trying to evaluate. That's going to help you, I believe, change the trajectory of what Michigan football has even looked like. Michigan's only a year removed from a natty. So, I mean, I love the way they're built. I love the brand. I love the NIL power. Michigan is a scary force here. More on them later in the show if you're watching the full hour show. But Michigan, I think, is definitely set up for success. I got them at number 6. At number 5, I got Notre Dame. All right, now Notre Dame, this is a Marcus Freeman play for me. They're likely, given the structure of the playoff, going to host a playoff game as long as they're in the 12-team format pretty much every single year. Cato has coined it the Southland Invitational, and I think we should get shirts made, quite frankly, because I think he's right. Marcus Freeman is still getting better at this, and the recruiting, I think, is only going to continue to improve under him. Not that he's not a good recruiter. He is, that's what I'm telling you. But now he has real skins on the wall behind him to pitch to recruits as to why they should come to Notre Dame and be a part of future national championships. So Marcus Freeman, only been on the job for 3 years as a head coach, period, not just at Notre Dame. He's going to get better at this, and I have to believe that his next 3 years will be better than his last 3 years, and he made a national title in that third year. So take of that as you will. At number 4, I got Ohio State. The resources, we talk about the $20 million roster from this last year. That's fine. They just won a national title. I don't think they're staying at $20 million, spoiler alert. The brand in itself will help recruiting. The roster is always going to be elite. I think Ryan Day is a top 2 coach in the sport. I've said that before. 70-10, won a national title, mic drop, keep the Michigan jokes to yourself. That's fine. The reason why I don't have Ohio State higher on this list, and I'll address that right now because I think it's going to be one of the big pushbacks. I'm really curious to see what the future is for Ohio State and Ryan Day past the next season or next 2 seasons. Obviously, 3 seasons is our sample size. There's no great way to say this, so I'm just going to come out and try to get to the point here. Ryan Day got an extension. I think that he has belief behind him. We believe in him. I wonder how tender that relationship is should they lose to Michigan one time in the next 2 years. Because that rivalry now, we all understand. We know how ugly it can be. It's. I mean, we appreciate that it's ugly. We're here for it being ugly, but like, there was some real kickback there towards Ryan Day and his family and all that when they lost again. So I wonder now, not does Ohio State part ways with Ryan Day, I wonder if somehow Ohio State loses to Michigan here in the future. We got him at number 6 on this list. Does Ryan Day just say, I want to go to the NFL? I wouldn't like that. I don't think that would be best for Ohio State. I don't think that'd be best for anybody. I mean, maybe it's best for Ryan Day. I don't know. I can't speak to that. But it's just, I think that's something we have to at least account for. That's why I don't have Ohio State higher. If you're telling me Ryan Day is going to be at Ohio State for the next 10 years, you can make a case for them being number 1 on this list, to be honest with you. But that's why I have them at 4. At number 3, I got the best head coach in the sport, Kirby Smart in Georgia. I don't think he's going anywhere. Recruiting is going to consistently be at a top 5, top 3 level, I think, as long as he's there. The development factor, too, for them is always going to be creme de la creme. How many times have you watched the NFL Combine and then some dude who blows it up is a Georgia guy? Nolan Smith, Ladd McConkey, like, it feels routine at this point. That's the scary part. They take already really high-level ingredients and get even more out of them. The Kirby Smart culture, I think, is going to still be dangerous. We saw the traits this past year. Georgia wasn't great really at anything and still won the SEC. If your down year is winning the SEC, I think Georgia's probably in a good spot here going forward. Now, number 2, I got Oregon. And people will make the postseason jokes, make the jokes you want to make. Just make sure you also mention that Dan Lanning has gotten better every single year. He's won more games every single year. They just won the Big Ten. They have as much brand power with kids in high school these days as I think anyone in college football, and the resources are second to none. Dan Lanning, I don't think is going anywhere. I think he's going to be extremely difficult to try and poach. If I'm buying stock, I'm buying a whole heck of a lot of it in Oregon over the course of the next 3 years. I've said it many times. It is when, not if, he wins a national title at Oregon. I think it'll be in the next 3 years. Just my take on things. Now, at number 1, the Texas Longhorns. Talk about brand power with Oregon, same deal for Texas. You have a coach who I believe is top 3 in the sport, who is very much so a known commodity at this point. Like, I would have a hard time talking about potential with Steve Sarkisian and not having him any higher on that list than any lower on the list than number 3. I feel like he's so developed as a head coach, which is weird to say, but like you talk about Marcus Freeman and Dan Lanning and some of these other guys on this list, Sharon Moore, and a lot of those guys I think are still finding who they are as head coaches. And that's not a bad thing. I think you should always strive to improve. Like Steve Sarkisian's been around the block now. Steve Sarkisian's had success. He's had failures. I feel like he's a very steady force here and is built for modern college football, and he's built for modern college football even more so given where he's at Texas. He's honed his craft, the geography, how close he is to so much talent. I think Texas in of themselves are an absolute powder keg, and I think they will be a college football playoff / national title contender every single year. And again, I put him in that category with Lanning. I think it's win, not if he wins one while he's at Texas. So honorable mentions, then we'll recap it here. The honorable mentions for me, like Miami, you can make a case for them being on this list. I want to see them own the state of Florida a little bit more. I love the idea of just going and getting the top portal quarterback every year. I want to see how sustainable that is. Arizona State, if you're telling me they're going to run the Big 12, which I don't think is irresponsible over the course of the next few years, Kenny Dillingham activates the Valley, vibes are immaculate, maybe Arizona State is a team that's kind of just a routine college football playoff attender. And SMU, when you talk about resources, is absolutely in that discussion as well. Penn State, you think you could make a case for. Clemson, if Dabo adjusts, you can make a case for. So I get it. We're going to have a lot of different teams that people think should have been in here, but regardless, that's my list. So to recap it here, 10 up to 1, Texas A&M at 10, Tennessee at 9, LSU at 8, Alabama at number 7, Michigan at 6, Notre Dame at 5, Marcus Freeman at Notre Dame at 5, Ohio State at 4, Georgia at 3, Oregon at 2, Texas at 1. I think I read that right. Michigan 6, Notre Dame 5, Ohio State 4, Georgia 3, Oregon 2, Texas 1. Yeah, that's about right. Curious to hear your thoughts, though. Excited to hear back from y'all in terms of who's set up for success over the course of the next 3 years. Now, I have to believe Texas feels like they're set up for success. Even just outside of the next 3 years, like this upcoming season, a lot of it has to do with who you have at quarterback. And I've said it before, I really love this roster. I love the trenches. I love the Steve Sarkisian culture being in effect. But I do think it's worth us noting here, the offense with Arch Manning running the show versus Quinn Ewers running the show, it's going to look different. Now, how will it look different? We'll unpack that together right now. I think we need to first have a conversation about the expectations for Arch Manning before we have a conversation about the expectations for the offense. My word of advice to Texas fans is just enjoy the ride when it comes to Arch Manning. Just enjoy that you got this dude in Austin. This dude's got physical giftings. There's a reason why he's a 5-star plus kind of cat out of high school. This dude's going to be really good, is my opinion. I would be careful to say he's going to be the next great Manning. He's going to win the Heisman Trophy. He's going to be Time Person of the Year. If he does that, amazing. But if he doesn't do that, aren't you just left with disappointment? Even if he takes you to the semifinals of the college football playoff, he did as much as Quinn Ewers, but you'd be bummed, obviously, because he didn't win the national championship in that specific season, I suppose. But I think you'd also just be feeling let down because of who in your mind and who Twitter told you Arch Manning is supposed to be. Like, let's just rein in a little bit here and allow, again, some runway for Arch Manning to develop as the starting quarterback at Texas. Looked great in flashes last year. It's very different, though, to be handed the keys for a drive around the parking lot than to be handed the keys for the entirety of a season and say, hey, you're our guy. Let's roll. Now, when we talk about him being the guy, I think that the way he's a different quarterback than Quinn Ewers, I think he is more of a fit for what this Texas roster is. Because last year, you sort of adjusted your game plan, it felt like, with Quinn Ewers. You thought maybe you would be a little bit more of a vertical passing attack and a lot more air it out is, I think, my assumption. A lot of our assumptions coming into the year didn't work out that way. It's not wrong, but it didn't work out that way. Texas's best players, in my estimation, are in the running back room. Receiver room's good. We'll talk about it in a second. But like Trey Wisner, you hope C.J. Baxter gets back healthy. The running back room is, I think, really where you get excited about your potential studs. You want to run the freaking football this upcoming season. Also, it complements the defense that I believe you're going to have up front yet again. Surprise, surprise, Texas plays good trenches, good defense in the trenches. Who would have thought? I think all of us now, given who they are. But adding Arch into the mix now to speak to how he fits better, I think when you talk about the ways that Arch can maybe even elevate the running back room with what he is on the ground, This dude's 6'4", 225, like what, 4'6", 40, I'm guessing here. I see stuff on Twitter saying he's like high 4.5s. I don't know. Dude's fast. Right? Saw him take off this past college football season in was it UTSA, I think it was, he took off against? Like, dude's got some wheels. All right? So there's nothing sneaky athletic about my guy. So when you're a defense and you have to account for that on the ground, it just divides your attention span of what you can account for. Like, I can't trigger as quickly on a Trey Wisner inside zone because I'm worried about 16 tucking it around the corner and getting 40 on us. Like, you have that at quarterback now. You didn't have that a year ago. So this isn't me saying he's less of a passer than Quinn Ewers, but I think when you talk about the identity of this offense, Arch Manning to me fits that mold a lot more seamlessly and a lot more comfortably with what Texas, I believe, will want to do on the offensive side of the ball. Now, this is not going to be a thing where Texas turns into a 65% run operation. I don't see that being the case. The thing that I like, actually, is in this receiver room, I think it'll be a lot more about being timely than being this game breaker every single week. Like, in the room, there's going to be some spots to fill. There's no way around that. I mean, you lose Matthew Golden, you lose Isaiah Bond and all those guys, but I like the versatility of this room, to be real with y'all. Because I think about that 2023 season where they made the 4-team playoff and Xavier Worthy, Adonai Mitchell, obviously both NFL talents, but it felt like you had different types of receivers to have to account for. I think that's the same for this room. Ryan Wingo is, I think, going to be wide receiver 1. Don't really believe that's too controversial. 6'2". He's not 6'4" like Adonai Mitchell, but he still brings that big target, got that speed, kind of a true wide receiver 1 kind of guy for you. DeAndre Moore, we saw what he can do this past season. I think his best football is ahead of him. Yeah, you might have to ask a true freshman to step in for you. Khalil Lockett might have to be a guy that gets some more burn for you. But even with that being said, I don't think this is an offense now that's going to have to throw for 300 yards a game. To me, I'm looking a lot more at the yards per pass numbers. Like last year, Texas was right around 8.5 yards per pass. That was up there in top 25 in America. I'd love to see them be even a little bit more lethal downfield. See them being like the high 8s, maybe low 9s. Like that, I think, would mean that Texas is really humming with what they're doing on the ground, and then guys on the back end are making them pay with a Ryan Wingo deep shot because you're tired of Trey Wisner and Arch Manning giving you fits up front. So it's more timeliness than having to take over the game through the air, but I do think that still will exist for Texas when you talk about what 2025 is. So let's make sure we have this discussion too. We talk about Arch adapting and progressing and all those things. Leave room for that to be the case for the offense too. You know what I'm saying? Like if it doesn't look exactly how you want it to against Ohio State, let's not hit the panic button and call Arch Manning a bust and Steve Sarkisian just can't do anything without Quinn Ewers or what. Like I can already see the tweets flying out there into the timeline. Let's try our best to avoid that. Understand what this offense is in September, what Arch is in September, could be very different than what it is in November. And I expect that to actually be how Texas goes about it. I think that as Arch gets more comfortable, they'll open it up even more with the ultimate goal of being hyper versatile. Like the dream thing for Texas would be you can beat anybody you have to score 40 against and throw the ball around the yard for 300, 350. Or if it's a game that's a rock fight and we got to go back to the 2024 version of what we are and just hunker down and run the football, we can punch you in the face and do that too. At that point, I don't know how you beat Texas because the defense is going to be great. I'm just telling you right now, defense is going to be awesome. But if the offense is that versatile, they can fight you any style you want in the back of the alley, or if you want to go out there and just go wrestle in the middle of the parking lot, whatever it is, if Texas can do that, God bless them. Because that's going to be where Texas gets really, really scary, and that's where they become a team that I believe can, go compete for a national title, which is how we feel about them right now. But for it to be a thought and then become a reality, that's where Arch and Texas get dangerous. So keep an eye on that. The offense will look different. Arch is a different quarterback than Quinn, but I do think that he actually fits better with what they want to be on offense and what they have on offense here moving into next season. Now, Texas is playing ball on the NIL front. Nobody is surprised by that. We'll talk about that right now. But Pete Nakos, all he does is just wake up every day, show up, give his best here in the On3 office, write banger articles. He wrote one the other day talking about the biggest spenders from this past transfer portal cycle. I actually got to chop it up with some personnel in the SEC, a staffer in the SEC, and the findings are pretty interesting here. You got Texas, Texas Tech, Ole Miss, Auburn, Michigan, all listed on that graphic there. No major surprises here, if you ask me, but I think it's worth unpacking these, one by one. Again, Texas, I don't think anybody's really that surprised to hear that Texas is spending money when it comes to acquiring talent, whether it's the portal, whether it's on the recruiting trail. The pushback you probably give here if you're a Texas fan, you say, wait a second, JD, we're like in the 40s range when it comes to the transfer portal. Why? We're a big spender? Listen, I don't know, man. The numbers are the numbers, allegedly. The numbers that I don't see are apparently the numbers. But if I were to push back and tell you, hey, Texas is spending a lot of money to acquire talent, are you really telling me that's not the case? No? Okay. I don't think so. Texas Tech, being on this graphic, kind of confirms what we were all assuming. They have the number one transfer portal class for us here at On 3. They, to me, are the poster child of what I love so much about the NIL era. Texas Tech, as much as I love Joey McGuire, as much as I love that logo, they're not like a blue blood necessarily. They're not one of those teams that you think about when you talk about, like the history of college football at a broad strokes perspective. But guess what? Money doesn't care. You're able to go acquire top talent, win at the highest level, and who does care is your fan base. And if your fan base carries at a high enough level in terms of their greenbacks, you have a chance to turn the tide and win a lot of football games. I love that for Texas Tech. I love that for Joey McGuire. I'm here for it. Ole Miss has the second highest ranked class. It'd be weird if they weren't on here. I mean, Cato said this before the show, and I 100% agree. This is kind of how Ole Miss operates. The last 4 cycles, they've taken 91 transfers. We thought those dudes were just showing up, free 99. They were showing up because they liked the major that they were getting at Ole Miss. Not to knock the academic standards of Ole Miss. I'm sure they're wonderful, but I have to believe a lot of that has to do with dollars and cents. And from a sheer quantity perspective, Ole Miss being on this list just makes too much sense. We say it a lot. The portal's kind of like, going out to eat versus high school recruiting is like going and grabbing groceries. If you want to go out to eat every night, you better be able to fit the bill every night. And Ole Miss, by nature of this report from Pete Nakos, is able to fit the bill. But there's 2 schools I want us to hone in on here a little bit more closely. Let's start with Auburn. Auburn, per this report from Pete Nakos, one of the biggest spenders in the transfer portal this past cycle. Now, something tells me if you're spending money in the portal, you're probably also spending money in other areas of your football program, also areas of your roster when it comes to retention or the high school level. Auburn's sitting at a point right now where they have a top 10 portal class and a top 10 recruiting class. Now, don't look now, but Auburn is doing things that we said during the Brian Harsin era they needed to do. What was the big pushback during Brian Harsin's time at Auburn? I don't mean to put the guy out here on blast, but let's just talk about it because it's relevant here. Everyone was very much so, everyone was very bearish on Brian Harsin, at least in Auburn circles. Nobody was sitting here telling themselves, hey, Auburn can't play ball. Man, if Auburn could just get some resources, nobody was saying that. Why? Because it wasn't true. The thing that you were talking about in relation to Auburn was always around the idea of, well, can they get aligned? Can the powers that be, the boosters and whoever else with money, get on the same page as the people in that football building and pull in the same direction? Because if they can do that, Auburn's pretty dangerous. Auburn brand's got some power. Again, the resources in general, they got them in-house. To win at the highest level, Auburn's got them. And so for that to be the reality now, with how they're acquiring talent at the portal level and the high school level, it comes down to me, what do you question about Auburn? Like, what are you waiting to see? Do you not believe that they're adding the right guys? Based on these rankings, I think that's probably a tough train for me to get on. Do you not believe in Hugh Freeze? This is where some people will differ in their opinion. I believe in Hugh Freeze. I do. I mean, having been down there, sat down and talked to him, seen how they do things out there on the plains behind closed doors, I believe in the processes and things that are happening internally that we don't see on Saturdays just yet that Auburn is doing. And so just because you haven't seen them yet doesn't mean you're not still going to have some fruits of your labor. That's kind of where I think Auburn's at right now. You do the right things enough times, at some point in time, the right place and right time will eventually find you. Now, this conversation is probably an interesting one to have after this season of, well, how much time do you have to find the right time? You would hope there's something you can put on the field this year if you're Hugh Freeze to give yourself more time. Not saying he's on the hot seat, but I do think people are saying, hey, want to see some results, and that's fair. But notice why Auburn is going to the portal as heavily as they are. In the last 3 cycles, Auburn has taken over 50 guys via the portal. Why do you go to the transfer portal to fix your roster? Why do you fix a roster if it's not in a good spot? Not a good enough spot, I suppose. Hugh Freeze has been saying for a long time, whether you believe him or not, the roster is not in a good enough spot. And so for them to now be balling the way they're balling on the recruiting trail, balling the way they're balling on the transfer portal side, I think that there's some reason for optimism if you're Auburn. Now, you got to see it to believe it, obviously, but go out and land an Eric Singleton, go get a Jackson Arnold. I think Auburn can and should have a lot of confidence in what they're doing from a resources side to how it's translated to the roster side. The last piece of the puzzle here is if they can win some ball games. And last thing I'll say here, if you're Auburn, like, isn't that kind of just the last thing that could set all this off? Won 5 games last year, still had a top 10 class. What if they win 8 games? If they win 9 games next year? I think that would only help recruiting. Your talent resources isn't an issue for them. So Auburn, with the top 10 class, the alignment of it all is what really should be, and I think is exciting for the folks out there on the plains. Now, let's talk about Michigan for a second, because they were also one of the, per this article from Pete Nakos, one of the biggest spenders in this past portal cycle. This is sort of terrifying, I think, for college football on a number of levels. One, it's confirmation of what we already believed to be true, like the Bryce Underwood thing happens. But even outside of that, to be playing ball at the high school level and the portal level in NIL, and to be able to win at that level, we mentioned it with Auburn, same thing's true with Michigan. Top 10 class when it comes to the high school level, top 10 class on the portal side. And the reason why this is so, I think, maybe terrifying, like I mentioned, for college football, this is sort of Michigan's answer now as to why you wouldn't go to Michigan, if that makes sense. Like, the reason why you wouldn't go to Michigan is, in some ways, because you thought you had a better chance to develop somewhere else, or you wanted to stay closer to home. But in large part, the main pushback, I think, for Michigan fans at least, was, hey, we're not playing ball at a high enough level for, NIL. Like, people don't come to Michigan because we're not paying them to come to Michigan. It's not the case anymore. That's not the case anymore. So if that's not the case, then why would you go to Michigan? Well, they won a natty in the last 2 years. That's first off. Second off, they just beat Ohio State and Alabama. I mean, they beat Ohio State routinely now, which is their thing, and Ohio State has to change that. You don't have to make this big pitch to make Michigan relevant in the mind of a recruit, portal or otherwise. You see the maize and blue. The logo is iconic. The Hail to the Victors thing is probably, I think, a thing that would be attractive if I'm considering going to a certain school. Like, just the overall vibe around Michigan in of itself is attractive enough. But if you're going to be a top, competitor on the NIL side now, what's happening? What's happening to the talent? The tip of the iceberg factor to me with Sharon Moore is why this is really exciting if I'm a Michigan fan. Because it's sort of a chicken or the egg scenario. You talk about, landing top talent. I was talking to someone on another board here for us here at On 3, a message board, doing like a little Ask Me Anything, going around and doing those on different fan sites. And someone asked us, hey, why aren't we able to land top D linemen like Georgia does? And I'll keep the fan side anonymous for this discussion. But my response was, well, the reason why Georgia lands a lot of top defensive linemen is because they've had a top defensive lineman pretty routinely. Like, people see the product on the field at Georgia at that position, and they want to go repeat and duplicate what they're having because, again, Georgia can make that pitch. That's Michigan right now, y'all. They're putting themselves in position to have the talent on this roster, in future rosters, from recruiting and portal levels, to only equate to more talent and have more success and win more games. And so once that happens, it really is a snowball effect. One of the more subtle notes in this whole discussion around Michigan, Sharon Moore brought in Sean McGee to be a general manager for Michigan. If you don't know that name, he's someone that was instrumental in constructing the roster that ended up going to an international title. Now, he wasn't there for that national title run, but he played a massive part in getting a lot of those dudes on that roster in Ann Arbor from the jump. So the fact that he's in the fold now, and Sharon Moore being the recruiter that he is, this thing is heading one direction. I mean, it genuinely is. And it's interesting, too, when you think about just the overall urgency around Michigan. If we're being real, if I'm an Alabama fan, this is how I would want us to respond to Saban's retirement. Like, Michigan won a national title, I said it, within the last 2 years, and they're acting like this is something that's just like, hey, this is our standard. We have to do this every single year. If we don't, it's a failure. And it was one down year with a new head coach. Nobody at Michigan is excusing that. Nobody's saying, oh, man, that's okay. We had one down year. We'll be back next year. No, it's like we're going to make sure we're doing everything in our power, from Dave Portnoy to Larry Ellison to Larry Ellison's wife. We're doing everything in our power to have a top-tier roster on the field. Anything less than that is not okay. So you're seeing it in the portal. You saw it with Bryce Underwood. Even outside of Bryce Underwood, man, what I have heard and what I've been told is that Michigan now is no longer going to lose on the NIL front when it comes to acquiring talent. That is scary. NIL makes teams relevant. It gets teams that maybe weren't relevant. I said that about Texas Tech. Not that they're not relevant, but like you don't think about them all the time when you talk about teams in the recruiting rankings or transfer portal team rankings or what have you. You think about Michigan as a brand. You recognize what they are. And so they were already relevant on the college football side, but to be relevant now on the portal side and the NIL side and the recruiting side, that's dangerous. That is very, very dangerous. So a lot of things going on in Ann Arbor. A lot of them good if you're keeping track of the talent acquisition over the course of the last few weeks, few months, honestly. And again, I think that this is just the start for what Sherrone Moore is doing out there in Wolverine country. We got to get out there at some point too, man. Like we've been out to Columbus a fair amount. We got to Knoxville, got out to I'm blanking out where else we went. Clemson. It was awesome. Like when we go out on the road again, Michigan's got to be on the short list, man. Got to be out there. Got to be out there. One other place I want to get out to is Athens, Georgia. And whoever's playing quarterback in Athens, Georgia is going to have a lot on their shoulders. But it's going to be a good battle. Like, I don't know that we are giving enough attention to just how close I think this ultimately could be and how much of a competition this is going to be. Is it Gunnar Stockton? Is it Ryan Puglisi? I've already made a pick on this. I'll make another pick and tell you, why I believe that. But we'll just break down the battle at large, too. Before we do that, though, make sure you are subscribed. Georgia fans, y'all been good to us. We appreciate you being subscribed. Appreciate you being dialed in. But if you haven't yet dialed in, no time like the present. We'd love to have you on board. Again, this is not a done deal at all. If it were me today, I would predict Gunnar Stockton is your starter game one, but not strictly because of what you saw against Notre Dame. But the reason why this is not a done deal is because that's just kind of how Kirby Smart rolls. He is all about competition. In fact, he wasn't just down to have a two-quarterback battle in Puglisi and Gunnar Stockton. I bet everybody on that roster will get a lot of reps. He tried to bring in more guys to compete. Tried to bring in a Fernando Mendoza, it sounded like, who ended up going to Indiana. Like, he was trying to bring in more dudes to compete for this job. Why? Because Kirby Smart understands competition gets the best out of everybody. It makes whoever my starting quarterback is, whether it's Puglisi, Stockton, somebody else, by nature of how they're going to have to compete for it and win it behind the closed doors when we get after it during the practice here in Athens, they will be the best guy for the job. Yes, because they were competitive and all those things, but because they performed against some of the best competition in the sport, period. And they do it every single day, Monday through Friday in Athens, Georgia. So you got that going for you. But when you talk about Gunnar Stockton and why I think he's the guy, to me, he just kind of fits what Georgia has been. And what I mean by that is Georgia's model has really been come here, wait your turn, do the right things, whether it's scout team, whether it's a backup role, whether you got to jump in like in the SEC title game, for example, and get us a chance to go win the SEC, great. But he's done all the right things. And at this point in time now, it's his turn. Not that that's anything that Kirby Smart's keeping track of. I think it's his turn / his time for him to take control of the job. I think the traits of Georgia and what they are ultimately are something that Gunnar Stockton embodies. Toughness, competitiveness, composure, all those things. I see that in Gunnar Stockton. And y'all, to be real, like, go check out the Notre Dame game again. I know there were some costly mistakes. He threw for more yards than anybody in the college football playoff against the Notre Dame defense. With a wide receiver core that, let's call it, man, they weren't really all that spectacular. So I love the jumping off point. I love what I've seen from him at this point. And I also love the legit buy-in that this team seems to have in a Gunnar Stockton. I'm not telling you they don't believe in Ryan Puglisi. That's not what I'm saying. But when Carson Beck went out of the game and Gunnar Stockton opens the second half against Texas in Atlanta, the body language of that roster was very different than you would expect the body language to be of a team that just lost their starting quarterback. There was no shell-shocked. There was no woe is me. And some of that's Georgia's being Georgia. I totally get that. I think a lot of that is the belief they had in Gunnar Stockton. And that belief, I think, is only amplified based on what he did in the Sugar Bowl against Notre Dame. My own opinion. Now, Ryan Puglisi, I've said it many times. That's my guy, dude. Like, I think that guy is a stud. I think he's got that dog in him, no pun intended. And I cannot speak to with absolute authority what he is as a college football player. You can't. Nobody can, really, unless you're watching practice in Athens every day. But what I can speak to is what he was as a prospect, top 10 guy for us here at On 3. I can speak to the way that his teammates talk about him, and they seem to rave about him as well. So you got that going for you. I mean, players don't gas up other players, especially if they're younger than them, for what they do during practice. And Ryan Puglisi, you go watch those different Players Lounge episodes. Aaron Murray and the team do a great job. Interview different players at Georgia. They talk about Ryan Puglisi and the way that he's balling during practice. Upperclassmen seem to have a good amount of respect for that guy. So I'll leave that there. But what I can speak to is when we sat down with him at the Elite Series here in Nashville when he was coming out of high school, at this point in time, Dylan Raiola had just committed to Georgia. And so everyone is watching Ryan Puglisi and saying, hey, Dylan Raiola's ranked pretty highly. Maybe this guy should go transfer somewhere else or decommit and decide to go play somewhere else, And Ryan Puglisi wasn't bashful about the fact that he was going to honor his commitment to Georgia. And the reason why was he's like, Georgia's where I want to be. I'm not afraid to compete. This is what I want to do. And when we sat down with him for an interview, it was sort of the elephant in the room. Like, of course, that was something that we were going to, in a roundabout way, ask him at some point in time. But he made a point during that conversation to steer the discussion towards Dylan Raiola and towards him staying at Georgia and making the point for everybody that was watching, everyone in that room, I am not decommitting. I am going to Georgia. Dude's wired a little bit differently. That's confidence, that's swagger, that's edge. That's what I want my quarterback to have. So I think that ultimately this battle will go through spring football. I think it'll go through fall camp, honestly. What will decide this battle, in my estimation, is going to be what happens in the competitive scenarios. It's about competing, right? It's about, who's going to be the one that wins the job outright. You go win the job, I think, at Georgia through fall scrimmages. And so the best way to stay in the know for those scrimmages and what happens, ton of intel from Dogs HQ when that's all going down during the spring. So go get a membership there. Our Georgia On 3 site, best in the business. Rusty Mansell on the team. Jake Rowe, crushing all of it. So get dialed in there. But I really do think if you want to win the quarterback job, you're going to have to take it in an 11-on-11 competitive scenario, just because I think the margins will be that thin between these two as they go through spring into fall camp. Again, my pick is Gunnar Stockton, but that's how I feel about it right now in February. Right now in February, man, we got almost an hour-long college football show. They pay us, dude. They pay us to do it. Unreal. Unreal stuff. Ton of content coming for you on this show, on this channel, the On3 YouTube channel. Another reason to be subscribed. Now, when we're not doing a full show during the certain day of the week, or you're just wanting to get more content from us, follow me on the socials. Instagram, Twitter, at JD PicKell. We post questions there to y'all to do more content. We have content in and of itself there. Sometimes you just get stream of consciousness. We're talking about what TV show we're watching, like Severance or whatever. But regardless, make sure you're dialed in there, and we appreciate you making the show what it is, man. So for Cato on the ones and twos, for myself, JD PicKell, we appreciate y'all. We love y'all. We will keep this party going, and we'll see y'all